And so the couples, there was a couple of neighbours who on the dot of 10 o'clock left and then rang the police and complained about the noise because it had gone beyond 1 minute beyond 10 o'clock.
Neighbours from hell.
On the buses, in those days, remember, this is 30 years ago, I'm sure things have changed now, but in those days you would have a ticket which would expire at a certain time during the day. So you'd have to do all your shopping, say, within 4 hours. I've known people who, on the stroke of that 4 hours, would get off the bus no matter where they were, and if necessary, just walk the rest of the distance home.
Goodness.
That is law-abiding. That's how the Swiss can operate, with everybody having a gun at home. You know, there's always a rifle behind the back door, ready for the Germans coming over the border or the French.
That raises the point, just to take us off from the Geneva Convention just for a second. Why has Switzerland remained neutral? I mean, I know they've got a lot of banks and a lot of international gold is locked up in the mountains there, but is that the reason why people have just treated them as this sort of sacrosanct thing?
Well, one of the major reasons is that they are heavily armed.
That's true, but there's not a lot of them.
Not a lot of them, but it is difficult to invade. From Hitler's point of view, obviously Hitler might well have thought about invading Switzerland during World War II, but decided he had enough problems elsewhere. He wasn't going to make his life even more difficult by taking on the Swiss as well. Plus, you do need to have a place where you need to do negotiations. For example, we now know that it was in Geneva that the American government was negotiating with the Japanese government on a Japanese surrender. In the end, of course, it didn't happen because the Americans said that the emperor would need to go on trial, and the Japanese were saying, well, that was unacceptable. Ironically, when MacArthur eventually did take over in Japan, he didn't execute the emperor anyway. So the war was prolonged, perhaps unnecessarily, but the secret negotiations between the forerunner of today's CIA and the Japanese government, again, took place in Geneva. So you need to have a place where you can carry out these secret negotiations. And, of course, the key thing about the Swiss is their secrecy. So you made a reference to money being kept in the mountains. The Swiss have a reputation for keeping secrets.
Good friends to have.
Which is why you would trust a Red Cross delegate to come to your facility, like Lonkesh in Northern Ireland, where the British were holding these members of the IRA and other guerrilla groups, because they knew that you could rely on Red Cross not then to go away and give a press conference.
That's it, exactly.
Keep their mouth shut.
That's it.
And you won't get access to their records for 50 years.
Oh, it's better than a 30-year rule. Looking at the UN more generally too, Keith, a lot of people criticise it and say it's powerless. We put a lot of money into it, and the Americans, well, they should give a lot, but they don't tend to. And at the end of the day, you've got countries like China or Russia on the Security Council, and you can never get consensus, and what's the point, and what are they doing for us? I know you've had involvement with the UN for many years. How do you, defend against those sort of criticisms?
Well, there are a number of points that you've made there. First of all, the UN is not an expensive organisation. Its total budget is less than that of the budget of the New York City Fire Brigade.
Is that true?
So you and I this year, in our taxes, through the Department of Foreign Affairs, will give about $10 to the UN. So the next time you go to the movies and you have a hot dog afterwards, you've spent the equivalent of the amount of money that's gone to the UN on your behalf for the year.
Right.
So it's not an expensive organisation. It's not a large organisation. There are more people working for Disneyland than work for the United Nations.
Goodness me.
More people work for the New South Wales Premier or the Victorian Premier than work at the UN. So it's not a large organisation, not an expensive one. And also, most of the UN's work is done out of the public eye. Now, you've mentioned the parts of the UN that get the publicity, which is the United Nations Security Council, which contains, as you said, Russia, China, America, etc.
Yeah.
But that's the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that, you have a whole lot of agencies, like the International Telecommunications Agency, which, in our case, I guess, looking towards Christmas, we're 4 months away from Christmas, we'll be sending Christmas cards around the world. That's the Universal Postal Union that, in fact, involves all the world's governments in the postage of envelopes and parcels around the world. Now, we just take that for granted.
Yeah, we just think it happens.
There is a way of Australia sending a postcard to Great Britain, for example, but that's actually the Universal Postal Union. Next time you use your mobile phone, that's because of regulations laid down by the International Telecommunications Union. And, of course, the swine flu issue, the action there is being coordinated by the World Health Organization.
That's right, yes, and they've certainly got busy on that one.
Yeah.
And generally, again, to me, we're dealing with an increasingly emergence of another bipolar world, in that we've got either one of two things, as I see it. We've got either the US and now China balance starting to come to the fore, or we've got the Islamic world and perhaps Christian or perhaps West, and there seems to be a bit of tension bubbling up there where it wasn't, say, 50 years ago in that conflict. Is the United Nations in a good position to sort of massage the tensions that are rising in this sort of new bipolar, or do you even see it as a new sort of bipolar era?
No, I don't. I think that, well, let's deal with the two issues you've raised. One is America and China. I think that in the case of America and China, at the moment anyway, you're not comparing like with like. It's not like, say, the old Cold War when you had two major military alliances. The Chinese certainly are increasing their military expenditure, but they have no military ambitions. The phrase that they keep using is the peaceful rise of China. They don't want to go out and create conflicts anywhere. They're too busy making money out of trade.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we're going to be heading towards a military confrontation between those two countries. There will certainly be economic problems, but even that's unusual because the major investor in the United States now is China. And so the Chinese wouldn't want to attack the United States for fear of damaging their own investment.
That's right, all those bonds.
The Soviet Union never invested in the United States, or vice versa. Whereas what we see with China and the United States is a new economic relationship that's emerged. The second one that you quoted was the Islamic world versus the rest of the world. Again, I don't think the Islamic world is that united. I think that the rest of the world has really got to become accustomed to the fact that the Islamic world is split with a lot of rivalries. It's not united behind one leader. Osama bin Laden obviously likes to think that he is, but he's not.
He's certainly not.
He's, you don't have a single unifying religious figure like a Joseph Stalin in the communist era or a Mao Zedong in the communist era. You don't get that. What you've got are a group of conservative Muslims who resent the way in which the world is changing. They're usually men, and they don't like the way the world is going. And yet you've got other younger Muslims who do want to have changes, and you have a lot of other Muslims who couldn't care less one way or the other. So you have within the Islamic countries a lot of internal unrest. And it's worth bearing in mind that the largest single group to be killed by Islamic terrorists are actually fellow Muslims.
That's right.
So, in fact, it's really a dispute that's going on there. I think the reason why the United States gets attacked is because it's simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's seen as supporting Israel, and so that's why it's on the terrorist radar screen. There's no obvious reason why Osama bin Laden would go after the United States anymore. For example, he's gone after Switzerland.
It's a bit of tall poppy syndrome there, too.
Aren't on his radar screen.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Dr. Keith Suter, your insight and foresight is absolutely fascinating, and there's certainly a lot of food for thought come out of that discussion. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.